You got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with. Half the time, they didn't even need to read the subtitles. They could look at it and know what was going on.
What if one of the most controversial films ever made was hiding something in plain sight, and almost no one caught it? When Joe Rogan sat across from Mel Gibson, it didn't feel like one of those explosive internet moments at first. It was just another long-form conversation, filmmaking, faith, the pressure of Hollywood. But then the tone shifted. Gibson began talking about the passion of the Christ in a way no one had heard before. Not the headlines, not the protests, not the box office numbers, something deeper. As he explained the hidden details woven into the film, the symbolism, the spiritual layers, the moments most viewers overlooked, Rogan's expression changed. This is a man who has interviewed world leaders, war veterans, scientists, and conspiracy insiders. Yet for a brief moment, he seemed genuinely shaken, quiet, processing. This wasn't promotion. It wasn't outrage marketing. It felt like someone finally revealing the full story behind a film that shook the world, and the parts that may have made powerful people uncomfortable. And once you hear what Gibson says everyone missed, you'll never watch that movie the same way again. Before we reveal it, hit like and subscribe, because not everyone wants you to hear this. To really understand what Gibson revealed that day, you have to go back to where it all started. This wasn't supposed to be another big-budget Bible movie with pretty costumes and dramatic music swells. Mel Gibson didn't want that. He wanted something that would hit you in the chest and not let go. He wanted people to feel the weight of what Christ's final hours actually meant, not just watch it from a comfortable distance. He told Rogan, the whole point was this: we're all responsible, not just the characters on screen, every single person watching. That idea alone made a lot of people uncomfortable before the cameras even rolled. Gibson spent years buried in the four Gospels, studying every verse about the final hours of Jesus. But he went further, pulling from ancient theological texts, early church writings, and historical sources most filmmakers would never bother with. He wasn't building a movie. He was building an experience. And it starts right from the first scene. We're in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's dark. Jesus is on his knees in prayer while his closest friends sleep nearby. Then a shadowy figure appears, Satan, whispering doubt into the silence. A serpent crawls forward, and Jesus crushes it beneath his heel. That single image is a direct reference to Genesis, the very first promise in Scripture that evil would one day be defeated. Most viewers didn't catch it. They were watching a movie. Gibson was telling a story that stretched across all of human history. Every shadow, every line of dialogue, every visual choice was intentional. This was cinema designed to make you lean in, not sit back. What Hollywood tried to bury now. Here's where the conversation with Rogan got really interesting, because Gibson didn't just talk about the film itself. He talked about the war to get it made. And make no mistake, it was a war. He noticed something that most people in Hollywood quietly accept, but rarely say out loud. There's a double standard when it comes to religion on screen. Other faiths get nuanced, respectful portrayals. But Christianity, it gets skepticism, eye rolls, dismissal. Gibson told Rogan flat out, Christianity is the one religion you're allowed to openly mock. When he started pitching The Passion, the doors slammed shut fast. Studios that had previously welcomed an Oscar-winning director with open arms suddenly stopped returning calls. Colleagues who had worked alongside him for years started creating distance. Meetings were cancelled. The message from the industry was clear, even if no one said it directly. This story isn't welcome here. But Gibson didn't back down. He financed the film himself. He assembled a team that shared his conviction, and he moved forward, knowing he was betting everything on a project most of Hollywood wanted to disappear. What happened next shocked everyone, especially the executives who passed on it. The Passion of the Christ became one of the highest-grossing R-rated films in history. Audiences showed up in massive numbers, proving that millions of people were hungry for exactly the kind of bold, unfiltered storytelling that industry gatekeepers had insisted no one wanted anymore. Supernatural events that defied explanation. Here's the part of Gibson's conversation that made even Joe Rogan go quiet. Because the making of this film wasn't normal, and Gibson didn't sugarcoat it. Jim Caviezel, the actor who played Jesus, didn't just perform suffering on screen, he actually suffered. The cross he carried weighed over 30 pounds. During filming, it dislocated his shoulder. During the brutal scourging scene, he was struck by the actual whips, once hard enough to knock the air out of him entirely. His hands bled. His pain was not acting. It was real, and you can see it in every frame. Then, the lightning struck. Assistant director Jan Michelini was hit by lightning twice during different days of filming. Caviezel himself was reportedly struck during the crucifixion scene, and yet both men walked away physically unharmed. The crew had no explanation. The set began to feel like a place where the line between the natural and the supernatural had become very, very thin, and the transformations didn't stop there. Luca Lionello, who played Judas, came onto the set as a self-described atheist. He left as a believer. Spending months exploring themes of betrayal and redemption changed something in him that he couldn't explain away. There were also reports of a young girl with severe epilepsy who went a full month without seizures during the period she was present near the production. Others reportedly experienced unexplained physical healings. Were these divine interventions? Remarkable coincidences? Nobody on that crew could say for certain. What they could say, unanimously, was that they felt like they were part of something far larger than a film shoot. One scene captures all of this perfectly. After the crucifixion, Jesus rests in Mary's arms, a direct visual echo of Michelangelo's Pietà. It's one of the most devastating images in the entire movie. And yet somehow, in the middle of all that grief, there's a strange and quiet dignity. That's the contradiction Gibson kept chasing throughout the entire film. Suffering and purpose existing together in the same frame. The world reacts. Critics, controversy, and $600 million. So after everything, the rejection, the self-financing, the lightning strikes, the dislocations, the film finally reached theaters, and the world lost its mind. Not in a bad way. Well, not entirely in a bad way. The Passion of the Christ earned over $600 million at the global box office. Let that sink in. A film in Aramaic and Latin, with no major studio backing. Directed by a filmmaker the industry had tried to quietly sideline, became one of the highest-grossing R-rated films in history. Hollywood's assumption that nobody wanted this kind of story. Destroyed. Completely and utterly demolished by the audience that showed up in numbers nobody predicted. But the reaction wasn't just commercial. It was emotional. Roger Ebert, arguably the most respected film critic of his generation, gave The Passion of the Christ 4 out of 4 stars. He wrote that he had never, in all his years of watching films, truly grasped the depth of Christ's suffering until he saw Gibson's portrayal. Coming from a man who had reviewed thousands of films across decades, that statement carried real weight. Other critics praised the film's artistic ambition and raw sincerity. Some compared Gibson's directorial vision to the great masters of spiritual cinema. But, and this is important, not everyone agreed. Before the film even released, religious scholars and community leaders raised serious concerns. Some argued that certain portrayals in the film could reinforce dangerous historical narratives, specifically stereotypes that had historically been used to justify persecution of Jewish communities. These weren't small concerns or invented controversies. These were historians and theologians pointing to real patterns in how stories like this had been used throughout history to cause real harm to real people. Gibson maintained from the beginning that his intention was the opposite, that the film was designed to show collective human responsibility for Christ's death, not to single out or blame any single group. He pointed to the scenes where Roman soldiers, disciples, and bystanders all played their part. He also defended the more creative choices in the film, like the scene where Judas is tormented by demonic children after his betrayal. That scene isn't in the Bible. Gibson acknowledged that, but he argued that it wasn't meant to be documentary filmmaking. It was visual storytelling designed to convey a spiritual and emotional truth. The guilt Judas carried, the psychological unraveling, expressed through cinematic language rather than literal historical record. Whether you agree with every choice Gibson made or not, the film forced a conversation that the industry had been avoiding for years, and that conversation is still happening. The sequel that could change everything. Here's the part that Rogan's audience, and frankly most people, don't know about yet. Gibson isn't done. For the past 6 to 7 years, quietly and away from the spotlight, Gibson and acclaimed screenwriter Randall Wallace have been building something that makes The Passion of the Christ look like a warm-up, a film about the resurrection. And before you think, okay, a sequel, fine, understand that this is not a straightforward sequel. Gibson described it to Rogan as one of the most ambitious projects he has ever attempted. And this is a man who climbed a mountain to film Braveheart. He wants to tell the story of the resurrection, not as a simple chronological follow-up, but as a cosmic narrative, an exploration of the eternal battle between good and evil that connects ancient history to the moment everything changed. He's talking about a story that spans from the fall of the angels all the way to the death of the last apostle. Think about the scope of that. He wants to show how the resurrection wasn't just an isolated miracle, but the turning point in a story that had been building since the very beginning of creation. To do that, Gibson has spent years studying ancient texts, theological debates, historical records. He wants to give audiences who already believe something they've never seen visualized before, and he wants to give skeptics, people who have never engaged seriously with these ideas, a reason to sit with the questions that faith raises. Because Gibson told Rogan something that cuts right to the heart of why this sequel matters. The resurrection, he said, is the one claim in all of Christianity that is either the most important thing that has ever happened or the greatest lie ever told. There's no comfortable middle ground. Either a man walked out of a sealed tomb 3 days after being executed, or he didn't. And Gibson's argument for why he believes it happened comes down to one question. Who dies for something they know is a lie? The apostles, the direct witnesses who claim to have seen the risen Christ, all faced torture, exile, and execution for refusing to take it back. Not one of them, under any pressure, said, "We made it up." Gibson argues that kind of commitment, across multiple independent individuals under extreme duress, is historically without parallel. People die for beliefs they hold sincerely, but nobody consistently dies for something they personally fabricated. That question, posed simply and directly in a conversation between a filmmaker and a podcast host, reportedly sat with Rogan visibly, not because it converted him, not because it resolved anything, but because it's genuinely hard to dismiss. What Rogan actually reacted to: the real, hidden truth. So let's bring it all together. What was it, really, that seemed to affect Joe Rogan so deeply in that conversation? Because Rogan is not easily moved. This is someone who has sat across from presidents, from scientists at the edges of human knowledge, from veterans who have seen things most of us can't imagine. He's heard extraordinary claims dozens of times. He's heard conspiracy theories, spiritual revelations, and deathbed confessions. So what was different this time? It wasn't any single shocking revelation. It wasn't one jaw-dropping secret that nobody had ever heard before. It was the weight of everything stacked together. It was a man who had every reason to play it safe. One of the biggest names in Hollywood, a man with a career and a reputation and real money on the line, who chose to stand almost entirely alone against an industry that didn't just doubt him, but actively wanted this story buried. It was the fact that supernatural things, things that don't fit neatly into rational frameworks, reportedly kept happening around the making of this film. And Gibson didn't dress them up or sensationalize them. He just described them, calmly, matter-of-factly, as if to say, I know how this sounds, and I'm telling you anyway. It was the transformation of people who came to the project with no faith and left with something they couldn't explain. An atheist playing the betrayer who becomes a believer. Healings that medical logic struggles to account for. A cast and crew who left, convinced they had participated in something far bigger than a movie. And it was the sequel. The idea that this man, decades later, is still this committed, still spending years in research and development, still refusing to make it easy or commercial or safe, still asking the hardest questions rather than giving comfortable answers. That kind of sincerity is genuinely rare. And in a media landscape that runs almost entirely on performance, on strategy, on personal branding, encountering something real has an impact, even on someone as experienced and guarded as Joe Rogan. Gibson said something in that interview that's simple but sticks. He wasn't trying to make a film for believers. He was trying to make a film that forced everyone, believers, skeptics, the indifferent, to actually reckon with what they believe about suffering, sacrifice, and what it means to give everything for someone else. And 20 years later, that film is still starting arguments, still moving people, still provoking exactly the kind of discomfort that means something real is being touched. The bigger picture. Here's what I think the real story is. Not just about the Passion of the Christ, but about what Gibson's journey represents. We live in a time when almost every piece of content, every film, every interview, every public statement is carefully calculated, tested, focus grouped, designed to get maximum engagement with minimum risk. Gibson did the opposite. He made a film that he knew would divide people. He funded it himself, knowing it might fail financially. He watched colleagues distance themselves from him and kept going anyway. He accepted the controversy, the protests, the critical debates, because he believed the story was worth it. And the audiences agreed. They showed up in the tens of millions, not because of marketing, not because of a studio campaign, because somewhere, in the middle of a cynical and distracted world, people recognize when something is made with genuine conviction. That's what Joe Rogan responded to. Not the theology, though the theology is interesting. Not the miracles, though those stories are hard to forget, but the human truth underneath all of it. That sometimes the most important stories are the ones the gatekeepers want silenced. That art made with real sacrifice hits differently than content made for profit. That sincerity, true, costly, all-in sincerity, still has the power to move people. And that whatever you believe about what that film depicts, about faith, about history, about what happens after we die, the story of how it was made is proof that conviction still exists in the world. Gibson bet everything on a story the world tried to bury. He won, and he's not finished. If this video made you think, share it with someone who would sit with these questions. Hit subscribe, because we're going deeper on stories like this. And let us know in the comments, did you ever see The Passion of the Christ? What did it do to you? We'll see you in the next one.